I do want to do a little bit of that history of Luke. Who is he? What was he doing? What is this book about? So let's start there, get a little background, and then we'll move forward. Now, Luke, as most of you probably know, is a gospel. What that means is it's one of four books. We have four gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are the first four books of the New Testament. Most of the rest of the books in the New Testament were written as letters to other churches to bring correction or encouragement or those things. But the first four books are what we call gospels. And a gospel is merely just another word for saying that this is the story of Jesus' birth, which we'll be doing for these next 8 weeks. Then it'll be about Jesus' life and ministry. Then the gospel covers Jesus' death and Jesus' resurrection. That's really what a gospel means. It's the story of the narrative of Jesus. Now, of these four, we have two of them that were written as first-hand accounts. Matthew and John were both disciples. They traveled around with Jesus. So the things that they wrote in there are what they witnessed firsthand. You know, when they say, you know, Jesus healed the leper, or Jesus, you know, restored sight to the blind, or Jesus performs all these miracles, these are things that Matthew and John actually saw. The other two books, Mark and Luke is the one we're covering here, are not first-hand accounts. So that means Luke wasn't a disciple. He wasn't traveling with Jesus. So a lot of this information that Luke has, and that he's going to tell us about, is stuff that he researched and learned about, and that. Luke was a doctor, and as part of being a doctor, he was also a scholar. You know, he enjoyed study and those type of things. To be honest, sometimes I think Luke is a bit a man after my own heart. Probably enjoyed facts, liked things ordered. You know, logic was probably very friendly to him. Again, being a doctor and a scholar. And so because of that, he writes this book, Luke. And then when he gets done writing the book of Luke, which is the story of Jesus, he sits down and writes another book. And that book is the book of Acts. And that's the story of the first church. So all in all, Luke's contributed 2 books to the New Testament, Luke and Acts. And they both are both complete stories. One, the complete story of Jesus, and then Acts, the complete story of the first church. So who is this Luke guy? Like I said, he was a doctor in the first century. He worked alongside Paul. He was a minister with Paul. Paul was the guy that, again, wrote a ton of books in the New Testament. He wrote Colossians, which was the first book that we worked through here. And as I was doing my research, one of the questions that actually gets asked often, and one of the questions I kind of had was, well, if Luke wasn't an eyewitness to the events, you know, it wasn't a first-hand account, how much can we trust what he wrote? You know, I mean, you know, how does he know what really happened? So that's actually a question that's been asked about the book of Luke a lot. And I found 3 quotes. One quote is from an archaeologist. One quote is from a biblical theologian, kind of a biblical historian. And then the third quote is from just a biblical scholar. And this is what they say about Luke. The archaeologist Sir William Ramsay, who's a British archaeologist, down in Egypt, he said, "Luke is a historian of the first rank. Not merely are his statements of fact trustworthy, Luke should be placed along with the very greatest of historians." Then Dr. Norman L. Geisler, he observed that in all, Luke names 32 countries, 54 cities, 9 islands, and all of them without a factual or historical error. And then finally, Josh McDowell notes that in specific instances where Luke texts have found to disagree with common scholarly knowledge, where archaeology has been able to resolve the difference, the disagreement has consistently been resolved in the favor of Luke. Additionally, Luke has brought to light previously unknown details which have later been verified by historians or archaeologists. So, I'm not an archaeologist, I'm not a historian, I'm not even really a learned biblical scholar, but the people who are all seem to agree Luke is somebody that we can trust. He did his homework, he did his research, so the story that we're going to be studying for these next 8 weeks and this next year as we go through the book of Luke, we can trust our actual events that actually happened. Luke did his homework and his study there.